My daughter-in-law hosted a family dinner and accidentally didn't invite me. I found out from my grandson. I said nothing. But the next day, I changed my will. The very house they've been living in rent-free for 5 years became their new monthly expense. I'm glad you're here with me. Please listen to my story till the end and let me know which city you're listening from. That way, I can see how far my story has traveled. I never thought generosity could become a weapon against me. For 5 years, I had opened my home, literally, to my son Michael and his wife Briella. The house on Maple Street, the one Richard and I had bought 30 years ago, the one where I'd raised Michael and his sister Claire, had become their rent-free haven. After Richard passed, the house felt too big, too empty. So when Michael mentioned their financial struggles, I didn't hesitate. "Mom, we're drowning in student loans," he'd said, his eyes pleading. "And with the baby coming, we just can't afford Bay Area rent." What kind of mother would I be if I'd said no? I moved into Richard's mother's old cottage across town. Smaller, cozier, perfect for a widow approaching 60. They moved into my house with promises of just a year or two, Mom, until we get on our feet. That was 5 years ago. I didn't mind, not really. I saw it as an investment in my grandchildren's future. Little Emma was 7 now, and Jacob had just turned 4. Every Sunday, I'd drive over for family dinner. Briella would cook. She was talented in the kitchen, I had to admit, and we'd sit around my old dining table, the one Richard had refinished himself, and I'd listen to the children's chatter about school and cartoons and playground adventures. But something had shifted over the past 6 months. The Sunday dinners became bi-weekly, then monthly. Briella always had a reason. Emma's soccer tournament, Jacob's birthday party with his preschool friends, Michael's work deadline. Reasonable explanations, each one. Nothing I could point to and say, "This is wrong." Except it felt wrong. The phone calls became shorter. Briella's tone grew cooler, more perfunctory. When I'd suggest meeting for coffee or taking the kids to the park, she'd respond with vague promises of soon and we'll see. Michael, caught in the middle, would call me separately, his voice strained with apologies I didn't fully understand. "You know how busy things get, Mom," he'd say. "Briella's just stressed with work and the kids." I wanted to believe him. I wanted to be the understanding mother-in-law, not the demanding one you hear about in jokes and sitcoms. So I stepped back. I gave them space. I waited for invitations that came less and less frequently. Then came that Tuesday in October. I was in the grocery store debating between 2 types of coffee when my phone rang. Emma's face appeared on the screen. Michael had set up video calling for the kids last Christmas. "Grandma!" Her voice was excited, slightly breathless. "Did you like the dinner? Wasn't Mom's lasagna amazing?" I froze between the coffee shelves. "What dinner, sweetheart?" "Last night, the big family dinner. Everyone was there. Aunt Claire, Uncle Tom, even Great-Aunt Margaret. Mom made 3 kinds of dessert." My hand tightened around my phone. The elderly woman next to me glanced over, concerned, but I couldn't move, couldn't speak. "Grandma, are you there?" "Yes, honey," I managed, my voice sounding distant even to my own ears. "The lasagna was lovely. I have to go now." "Love you." I ended the call before she could respond, before she could ask why I sounded strange, before I had to explain to my 7-year-old granddaughter that I hadn't been invited, that everyone, my daughter Claire, my son-in-law Tom, even Richard's elderly Aunt Margaret, who lived 3 hours away, had been invited to a family dinner at my house, and I had not. Standing in that grocery store aisle, fluorescent lights humming overhead, I felt something crack inside my chest. Not break, not yet, but crack. Like ice on a frozen pond when the temperature starts to rise. I left my cart where it stood and walked out to my car. Sat in the driver's seat with my hands on the wheel, staring at nothing. An accidental oversight? Possible, but unlikely. Claire would have noticed my absence. She would have asked. unless she'd been told I couldn't make it, unless Brianna had lied. How long had this been going on? How many gatherings, how many celebrations, how many moments with my grandchildren had I missed while they lived in my house, rent-free, treating me like an inconvenient stranger? I drove home in a daze, made tea I didn't drink, sat in Richard's old chair and watched the sun set through the cottage windows. The house was quiet except for the ticking of the grandfather clock Richard's father had left us. That night, I didn't call Michael, didn't confront anyone. I'd learned long ago that anger without information is just noise. If I was going to act, I needed to know exactly what I was dealing with. But I also knew with cold certainty that something fundamental had changed. The woman who'd driven to the grocery store that morning wouldn't have fought back. The woman sitting in this chair watching darkness fall absolutely would. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I sat at my small kitchen table with a legal pad and a calculator, something Richard had always teased me about. "Everything's digital now, Helen," he'd say. But I thought better with pen and paper, with numbers I could see and touch. At the top of the page, I wrote 5 years. Below it, I started calculating. The house on Maple Street, Richard and I had paid it off 10 years before he died. Current market rent for a 4-bedroom house in that neighborhood, approximately $3,500 a month. Probably more, given the recent tech boom in our area. I was being conservative. $3,500 times 12 months times 5 years, $210,000. I stared at that number until my eyes burned. $210,000 of housing I'd provided, not counting utilities, property taxes, insurance, or the new roof I'd paid for last year when Michael said they couldn't afford the expense. Another $18,000 for the roof. Add the property taxes, roughly $6,000 annually. Utilities that I'd continued to pay because, "We'll transfer them next month, Mom, once we sort out the accounts." I was approaching $300,000 of generosity over 5 years, and in return, I'd been deliberately excluded from family gatherings, slowly erased from my grandchildren's daily lives, treated like an ATM rather than a mother, a grandmother. The fear hit me around 3 in the morning. What if I was wrong? What if I confronted them and destroyed my relationship with my son forever? What if I pushed too hard and lost access to Emma and Jacob completely? Brianna had that power now, didn't she? She could poison them against me, make me the villain in her story. I imagined holidays without my grandchildren, birthdays uncelebrated, growing old without their voices, their laughter, their sticky-fingered hugs. The fear was real. It was rational. It almost worked. But then I thought about Emma's confused voice on the phone. "Did you like the dinner, Grandma?" She hadn't known I wasn't invited, which meant they'd hidden my exclusion from the children. They'd deliberately orchestrated my absence, then lied about it, or at least obscured the truth. That wasn't an accident. That was a choice, a calculated one. By dawn, I'd made my decision. I would not be erased quietly. I would not bankroll my own exclusion from my family, but I also wouldn't act rashly. I was 62 years old, not 22. I'd been a paralegal for 30 years before retiring. I understood how systems worked, how documentation mattered, how patience could be more powerful than rage. My first call at 8:30 that morning was to James Murdoch, the estate attorney who'd helped me with Richard's will. I'd kept it current, updating it after Richard's death to reflect my new circumstances. Michael and Claire were equal beneficiaries, with specific provisions for the grandchildren's education. "James, I need to discuss some changes to my estate plan," I said, keeping my voice steady. "Relatively urgent." "Of course, Helen. How's Friday morning?" "Perfect." My second call was to Donald Peterson, the property attorney who'd handled our real estate transactions over the years. "Donald, I have a question about property rights. If I own a house outright, but family members have been living there with verbal permission for several years, what are my legal options for establishing a formal tenancy agreement? His answer was exactly what I needed to hear. With proper notice, I could absolutely convert their informal arrangement into a legal lease, or ask them to leave. The house was mine, fully paid, with clear title. The fact that they were family actually complicated things emotionally, but simplified them legally. "Are you having problems with Michael and Briella?" he asked gently. Donald had known our family for 20 years. "Let's just say it's time to formalize the arrangement," I replied. My third action was simpler but somehow more painful. I opened a new document on my computer and began keeping a log. Dated entries. Every interaction, every conversation, every canceled plan. I would document everything going forward, not out of paranoia, but out of preparation. If Briella wanted to play games with my access to my grandchildren, I needed records. Courts cared about grandparent rights in our state, but they cared more about documentation. I titled the document, Family Contact Log, October 2024. The first entry was brief. October 15th. Learned from Emma about family dinner on October 14th. All family invited except me, not informed of event, children unaware of my exclusion. Then I closed my laptop and made myself breakfast. Toast and jam, coffee that actually got drunk this time. I ate slowly, methodically, at my little kitchen table with the morning light streaming through the windows. I wasn't angry anymore. Anger was hot, impulsive, short-lived. What I felt now was something colder, more patient, more determined. They'd made their choice. Now I would make mine. And unlike them, I would make it legally airtight. Friday morning arrived cold and clear. I dressed carefully for my meeting with James. Not my usual casual sweater and slacks, but the navy suit I'd worn to Richard's funeral. Armor, I suppose. Professional armor for a professional decision. James's office was in the renovated Victorian downtown, all exposed brick and modern furniture. He greeted me warmly, offered coffee I accepted, then settled behind his desk with the kind of focused attention I'd always appreciated. "So, Helen, what changes are we making?" I took a breath. "I want to remove the house on Maple Street from Michael's inheritance. I want to restructure the will so that property goes to Claire, with provisions that Emma and Jacob's education funds remain protected but separated from Michael's portion." James's pen paused above his legal pad. "That's a significant change. May I ask what's prompted this?" I'd prepared for this question. "My son and his wife have been living in that house rent-free for 5 years. The arrangement was temporary, but it's become permanent without any discussion of contribution or gratitude. Moreover, I've been systematically excluded from family events." I kept my voice level, factual. "I'm being erased from my grandchildren's lives while subsidizing the household doing the erasing." "I see." James leaned back, his expression thoughtful. "Have you discussed this with Michael?" "Not yet. I want the legal framework in place first. I'm also considering establishing a formal lease agreement for the property. I wanted your advice on timing." We spent the next hour discussing options. James was thorough, asking questions I hadn't considered. What if Michael contested the will change? What if the lease agreement damaged our relationship beyond repair? Was I prepared for family conflict that might last years? "These are nuclear options, Helen," he said finally. "I'll execute whatever you decide, but I want you to understand the implications." "I understand perfectly," I replied. "I've spent 5 years being generous. It's made me invisible. I'd rather be respected and resented than generous and erased." He nodded slowly. "Then let's draw up the documents." I left his office with appointments scheduled for the following week, will revision signing, and a consultation with a real estate attorney about lease agreements and fair market rent calculations. Everything documented, everything legal. That afternoon, I did something I'd been avoiding. I drove past the house on Maple Street, not stopping, just looking. The lawn needed mowing. The flower beds I'd planted decades ago were overgrown. Richard's basketball hoop still stood in the driveway, but it was rusty now, neglected. And there, in the window of what used to be Michael's childhood bedroom, I saw something that made my blood run cold. A for sale sign from a real estate company, printed and taped to the glass. Not visible from the street. You'd have to be in the driveway or looking from exactly the angle I was looking. But unmistakable. They were planning to sell my house. I pulled over 2 blocks away, hands shaking on the steering wheel. They were planning to sell the house I owned, the house they'd never paid a cent toward. The audacity was breathtaking. I called Donald Peterson immediately. Donald, hypothetical question. If someone is living in my property rent-free and I discover they're attempting to sell it, what are my legal options? They can't sell property they don't own, Helen. Do you have reason to believe Michael and Briella are trying to sell your house? I just saw a real estate sign in the window. His silence was eloquent. Then, we need to meet, today if possible. This could constitute fraud, especially if they're representing themselves as the owners to potential buyers or agents. 2 hours later, I was back in a lawyer's office, this time with Donald and my property deed, tax records, and every document proving my sole ownership of the Maple Street house. Donald made copies of everything, then made a phone call to a colleague who specialized in real estate fraud. "Here's what we're going to do," he said after hanging up. "First, we establish your legal right to access the property for inspection, which you have as the owner. Second, we document any evidence of their sales attempt. Third, we send a formal notice converting their residency into a month-to-month tenancy with fair market rent, giving them the option to pay or vacate within 60 days. Fourth, if they've already been in contact with real estate agents claiming ownership, we explore fraud charges." "This will destroy my relationship with Michael," I said quietly. "Helen, with respect, what relationship? They're trying to sell your house out from under you." He was right. The proof wasn't just in the exclusion from family dinners anymore. It wasn't just emotional neglect or social cruelty. They were attempting to steal my property, to profit from my generosity by literally stealing from me. That evening, Michael called. His voice was tense, strange. "Hey, Mom. Quick question. You haven't happened to drive by the house recently, have you?" My heart rate spiked, but my voice stayed calm. "Why do you ask?" "Oh, no reason. Briella thought she saw your car on the street yesterday. Just wondered if you'd stop by without letting us know." They knew. Somehow, they knew I'd seen something or they were worried I might. The paranoia in Michael's voice was unmistakable. "I drive through that neighborhood sometimes," I said carefully. "It's still my house, Michael. I'm allowed to look at my own property." Silence, heavy, loaded silence. "Right," he said finally. "Of course. Well, I should go. Talk soon." He hung up before I could respond. I sat holding the phone, listening to the dial tone, and realized this was the point of no return. They knew I was aware of something. They were preparing for conflict. Good. So was I. And I had the law, the documentation, and the truth on my side. They had nothing but entitlement and lies. The registered letter went out on Monday morning. Donald had crafted it carefully. Formal notice that the property at 247 Maple Street, currently occupied by Michael and Briella Hayes, would be converted to a standard month-to-month tenancy agreement, effective December 1st, fair market rent, $3,500 per month, plus utilities. They had 30 days to decide whether to sign the lease or vacate the property. A copy went to James for my legal files. Another copy I kept in a fireproof safe I'd purchased specifically for this purpose. Documentation. Always documentation. The call came 48 hours later. Not from Michael, from Briella. I was gardening in front of the cottage when my phone rang, her name flashing on the screen. I considered not answering, then decided, no, I would not hide. "Hello, Brianna." "What the hell is this, Helen?" Her voice was pure venom, the carefully cultivated sweetness completely gone. "You're charging us rent after everything we've done for you?" I set down my trowel, brushed dirt from my gloves. "Everything you've done for me, please enlighten me. We've maintained your property for 5 years. We've kept it from falling apart while you're living in that tiny cottage. We've paid for repairs, improvements." "I paid for the roof," I interrupted calmly. $18,000 last year, and I've continued paying property taxes and insurance. Shall we compare receipts? "You're being vindictive and cruel. Michael is your son. How can you do this to your own son? How can I charge fair rent for valuable property? Rather easily, actually. The real question, Brianna, is why you believed you were entitled to free housing indefinitely. We had an understanding. The understanding was temporary assistance. 5 years isn't temporary. It's permanent, and I'm no longer comfortable with that arrangement." The silence that followed was electric with rage. When she spoke again, her voice was quieter, more dangerous. "You know we can't afford $3,500 a month. You know this forces us to move. Then move. And you're fine with that? Fine with losing access to your grandchildren? Because that's what will happen, Helen. You do this, and you won't see Emma or Jacob again. I'll make sure of it." There it was. The threat I'd known was coming. The weapon she thought would make me fold. "Brianna, are you threatening to deny me access to my grandchildren as retaliation for charging rent on my own property?" "I'm stating a fact. Actions have consequences." "Yes," I agreed. "They do. And threatening grandparent alienation in response to a legitimate rental agreement is one action whose consequences you might want to consider carefully, especially in a state with grandparent rights laws, especially when documented in a phone call." I wasn't recording. That would be illegal in California without her consent, but she didn't know that. The bluff worked. "You wouldn't dare take us to court." "Try me." Another silence, then, "Michael wants to talk to you. Tonight, at the house, 7 o'clock. I'll be there," I said, and ended the call before my hands could start shaking. They started shaking anyway. I sat down hard on my front steps, phone clutched in my lap, and let the fear wash over me. She'd threatened my grandchildren, actually threatened them, out loud, explicitly. Everything Donald had warned might happen was happening. But I'd stood firm. I'd called her bluff. And more importantly, I documented it in my log immediately after the call, while the details were fresh. Date, time, exact threats made. That evening, I drove to Maple Street with Donald's business card in my purse and a small recording device, legal in California if I was a party to the conversation, in my jacket pocket. I wasn't naive. This was a confrontation, and I would be outnumbered in my own house. Michael opened the door. He looked terrible, exhausted, conflicted, older than his 34 years. "Mom, Michael." The living room felt alien. They'd rearranged all the furniture, painted over the warm beige Richard and I had chosen with a cold gray. Family photos on the mantel, none including me. Not one. Brianna sat on the couch, arms crossed, face set in hard lines. She didn't stand, didn't greet me, just stared with open hostility. "Mom, please," Michael started. "Can't we discuss this reasonably? This rent demand is—" "Fair market rate," I interrupted. "Actually below market rate for this neighborhood. We're family." "Yes, we are," which makes it particularly painful that I learned from my granddaughter about a family dinner I wasn't invited to, a dinner that included everyone except me, in my house. Michael had the grace to look ashamed. Brianna did not. "That was a misunderstanding," she said flatly. "Was it? How many other misunderstandings have there been? How many other gatherings? How long have you been erasing me from family life while living rent-free in my home?" "We're not doing this." Briella stood abruptly. "Here's what's going to happen, Helen. You're going to withdraw this ridiculous rent demand. You're going to continue letting us live here under our original arrangement. And in return, we'll consider allowing you more access to the children." "Consider allowing?" I kept my voice steady. "They're my grandchildren, Briella, not bargaining chips." "They're my children," she shot back. "And I decide who has access to them. You want to play hardball with rent? Fine, but you'll lose them. Is that really worth it to you?" I looked at Michael, who wouldn't meet my eyes. My son, who'd apparently lost his spine somewhere in the past 5 years. Who would let his wife weaponize his children against their grandmother? "Here's what's actually going to happen," I said quietly. "You have until December 1st to sign a lease at fair market rent or vacate my property. Those are your options. What you don't have is the option to continue living rent-free while holding my grandchildren hostage." I walked to the door, turned back. "And Michael? I'm disappointed. Your father would be too." That landed. I saw it hit him, saw the flinch, the pain. Good. I drove home in a fog, pulled into my garage, and sat in the car for 20 minutes before I could make my legs work. Once inside, I poured a glass of wine I didn't drink and called Claire. "Mom, what's wrong?" Everything poured out. The dinner, the rent demand, the threats. Claire listened without interrupting, and when I finished, her voice was steel. "I'm coming over. Don't move. I'll be there in 20 minutes. She was there in 15. Claire sat across from me at my kitchen table, exactly where I'd done my calculations 2 weeks ago. My daughter had her father's steady gaze, his ability to cut through nonsense to the truth beneath. "They threatened to keep Emma and Jacob from you?" Her voice was dangerously quiet. "Explicitly. Briella said if I don't withdraw the rent demand, I won't see the children again." "That's grandparent alienation. That's illegal in California under certain circumstances." "I know, Donald says we can fight it if necessary, but..." I trailed off, staring at my untouched wine. "But you don't want to drag your grandchildren through a court case. I understand." Claire reached across the table, took my hand. "Mom, I need to tell you something. That dinner Emma mentioned, I tried to call you that day, multiple times. Briella told me you'd been invited but had declined because you weren't feeling well." The kitchen tilted slightly. "She lied to you. She lied to everyone." When I asked Michael about it later, he got defensive, said there'd been a miscommunication. "But Mom, it wasn't a miscommunication. She deliberately excluded you and covered it up." We sat in silence for a moment. Then Claire said, "There's more." At that dinner, Briella made comments about how you were getting forgetful, how you'd become difficult, how hard it was to manage your expectations. She was laying groundwork. For what? For making everyone think you're the problem, that you're unreasonable, maybe declining mentally. So when you finally react like you're doing now, everyone will think it's proof she was right. The manipulation was sophisticated, almost elegant. If I'd exploded in anger, if I'd made a scene, Briella's narrative would have been confirmed. The difficult mother-in-law, unstable, irrational. But I hadn't exploded. I'd documented. I'd gotten lawyers. I'd acted with cold precision. "She didn't expect you to be strategic," Claire said, reading my thoughts. "She expected you to be emotional. That's why she's panicking now." "Is she panicking?" Michael called me 3 times today, asking what I thought about the rent situation, whether I thought you were being fair, whether I'd talked to you. He's scrambling. Over the next few days, the attempts to manipulate me into backing down intensified. Michael sent a long email full of reminiscences about his childhood, reminders of how close we'd been, appeals to my love for him and the grandchildren. The subtext was clear. If you loved us, you wouldn't do this. I responded simply, Michael, I do love you. That's why I helped you for 5 years. But love isn't the same as allowing myself to be exploited and excluded. The rent requirement stands. Then came the financial sob story. Briella sent a detailed breakdown of their expenses, highlighting childcare costs, student loans, Michael's modest salary. The implication, we can't afford this rent, and you're cruel for demanding it. I forwarded it to Donald with a note. For documentation, do not respond on my behalf. He replied within an hour. Helen, based on the financial information she's provided, they can afford approximately $2,800 a month in rent. They're not destitute. They're comfortable and want to stay that way on your dime. The third attempt was the most insidious. Great Aunt Margaret called. Richard's aunt, now 87 and living in assisted living. Helen, dear, Michael tells me there's been some unpleasantness about the house. He's so worried about you. Says you've been under stress, not quite yourself lately. There it was. Brianna's narrative being spread to elderly relatives. Helen's losing it. Helen's becoming difficult. Margaret, I said gently, I'm perfectly fine. I'm simply requiring my son to pay fair rent for valuable property. That's not stress or instability. That's common sense. But, dear, they're family. Yes, they are. Which is why I gave them 5 years rent-free. But family isn't an excuse for indefinite exploitation. After I hung up, I sat very still, feeling the shape of Brianna's strategy. She was isolating me, turning family members against me, building a consensus that I was the unreasonable one. If I let that narrative take hold, I'd lose before the real battle even began. I needed my own support network, visible and documented. That evening, I invited 3 of my closest friends to dinner. Carol and Janet, whom I'd known since Michael was in elementary school, and Susan, my former colleague from the paralegal firm. I'd been avoiding them lately, ashamed somehow of my family's situation. That ended now. I told them everything, showed them the timeline, the documentation, the lawyer letters, laid it all out like evidence in a case, because that's what it was. Jesus Christ, Helen, Carol breathed. They tried to sell your house. We believe so. The sign came down quickly after I was spotted in the neighborhood, but Donald got photographs. And Briella actually threatened to keep the kids from you? Janet's face was flushed with anger. That's kidnapping. It's custodial manipulation, I corrected. Legal, unfortunately, unless I can prove it's not in the children's best interests, which is why I'm documenting everything. Susan, ever practical, asked, What do you need from us? Witnesses. If this goes to court, and it might, I need people who can testify to my mental competence, my character, my relationship with the children before Briella started interfering. I need to counter her narrative. You've got us, Susan said firmly. Whatever you need. That night, after they left, I slept properly for the first time in weeks. Not because the problem was solved. It wasn't. But because I wasn't alone anymore. I had people on my side. People who knew the truth. The next morning, Michael sent a text. Can we please talk? Just you and me, no Briella. Coffee tomorrow? I stared at the message for a long time. Was this genuine or another manipulation? Claire's warning echoed. They're trying to wear you down. Stay strong. I replied, coffee is fine, but the rent requirement is not negotiable. If you're meeting with me to plead Brianna's case, save us both the time. His response came quickly. I just want to talk to my mom. I agreed to meet him Wednesday at the coffee shop near the cottage. Neutral ground, public place, and I'd keep my phone recording in my purse just in case. Because I'd learned, trust once broken had to be rebuilt with evidence. And Michael had given me no evidence yet that he'd grown a spine. And the coffee shop was crowded with the Wednesday morning rush. retirees, remote workers, young mothers with strollers. I arrived early, chose a corner table with clear sightlines to the door, and ordered herbal tea I didn't particularly want. My phone was in my purse, recording app activated. Michael arrived exactly on time. He looked worse than he had at the house, unshaven, rumpled, like he hadn't slept. He ordered black coffee and sat down heavily across from me. "Mom." "Michael." For a moment, neither of us spoke. I watched him struggle with where to begin, saw the exhaustion in his eyes, and felt the familiar maternal instinct to make it easier for him, to smooth things over, to fix it, to take away his pain. I crushed that instinct ruthlessly. "Thank you for meeting me," he said finally. "I know things have been difficult." That's an interesting word choice. He winced. "Okay, I deserve that. Mom, I need you to understand. Brianna's under a lot of pressure. Her job's been unstable, she's dealing with the kids, and now this rent thing. The rent thing is me charging fair market rate for my property, Michael. Property you've occupied rent-free for 5 years. I know, but the timing. What timing would be better? Year 6? Year 10? At what point does temporary assistance become permanent entitlement?" He rubbed his face. "Can't we find some compromise? Maybe reduced rent, or we could pay utilities and property tax instead." "I've paid utilities and property tax for 5 years, Michael, while you saved thousands of dollars monthly. Where did that money go?" "What do you mean? You told me 5 years ago you were drowning in student loans and couldn't afford Bay Area rent, but you've both been working, both drawing salaries. Where did all that saved rent money go? Because if you can't afford $3,500 now, after saving at least that much monthly for 5 years, something doesn't add up." His silence was damning. "Michael, that's over $200,000 you didn't have to spend on housing. Where is it?" We've had expenses. Childcare, the kids' activities, medical bills, and a Tesla," I said quietly. "Brianna drives a Tesla Model Y, $50,000, and I noticed the kitchen has been completely remodeled, designer appliances. That wasn't there 5 years ago." His face flushed. "We're allowed to improve the house we live in." "Improve my house? With money you saved because I charged you nothing. Money that could have been going toward rent, toward building equity in your own property, toward actually becoming independent. Instead, you remodeled my kitchen and bought a luxury car." "Jesus, Mom, are you really doing an audit of our life?" "I'm pointing out that your claim of financial hardship is questionable at best, fraudulent at worst." The door chimed. I glanced up automatically, and my blood ran cold. Brianna had just walked in. She scanned the coffee shop, spotted us, and headed straight for our table. "Michael, did you invite her?" My voice was sharp. "No, I swear, I don't know." Brianna pulled out a chair, sat down without asking. "Helen, Michael. How nice. A family coffee date." "This was supposed to be private," Michael said weakly. "We're married, Michael. We don't keep secrets." She turned to me, her smile brittle and cold. "So, Helen, has my husband managed to talk sense into you yet?" "Your husband and I were having a conversation you weren't invited to, about our living situation, which affects me, which means I have every right to be here." She leaned forward. "Let me make something very clear, Helen. We're not paying rent. We're not signing a lease. We're not leaving. Those aren't the options available to you. You think you can evict us, legally force your own son and grandchildren out of your house? The public relations disaster alone. Imagine what people will think, what Emma and Jacob will think when they're older. Grandma threw us out. Grandma charged fair rent for valuable property, which you refused to pay," I corrected. "But please, continue threatening me in a public place. It's helpful for documentation." Her eyes narrowed. "You're recording this. I'm legally allowed to record conversations I'm party to. California's a two-party consent state for confidential conversations, but we're in a public coffee shop. No expectation of privacy." That stopped her. For just a moment, uncertainty flickered across her face. Then the mask came back, harder than before. "Fine. Here's what you're not understanding, Helen. You need us more than we need you. You're 62 years old. You're alone. You're a widow with no husband, no purpose beyond being grandma. Without access to our family, what do you have? That sad little cottage, your garden, lunch dates with old lady friends who'll die off in the next decade?" "Brianna," Michael started, but she cut him off. "She needs to hear this. You want to talk about power, Helen? Real power? I control your access to the only family you have left. Claire lives 6 hours away. Great Aunt Margaret's in assisted living. Your social life revolves around my children. Your identity revolves around being their grandmother. Take that away, and you're just a lonely old woman waiting to die." The coffee shop noise seemed to fade. I felt the stares of nearby tables, people pretending not to listen while absolutely listening. Felt Michael's horror, his inability to intervene. Felt the calculated cruelty of every word Brianna had just spoken. And I felt something else, something cold and sharp and absolutely certain. I stood, calmly picked up my purse, looked at Brianna with the same expression I'd once used on opposing counsel who'd underestimated me. "Brianna, everything you just said confirmed what I've suspected for months. You're not a loving daughter-in-law who's overwhelmed. You're a calculating manipulator who's been systematically isolating me while exploiting my generosity. And you just made those threats in public in front of witnesses." I turned to Michael. "Your wife just told me I'm a lonely old woman waiting to die, that my only value is access to your children, and that she controls whether I have a family or not. If you don't have a problem with that, then I've lost you already, and I'll mourn that, but I won't enable it anymore." I walked out of the coffee shop with my back straight and my head high, made it to my car, drove 3 blocks before I had to pull over because my hands were shaking too hard. I sat in a parking lot behind a grocery store and let the fear come, because Brianna had hit every pressure point perfectly. I was alone. I was getting older. My grandchildren were my joy, my purpose, my connection to the future. But I was also right, legally, morally, right? And Brianna's mask had finally, fully slipped. In public, possibly recorded, definitely witnessed. I pulled out my phone and texted Claire, "Need to talk, soon, it's escalating." Her response was immediate. "Coming to you tonight, don't engage with them anymore without backup." Then I called Donald. "We need to accelerate the eviction timeline, and I need to know my rights regarding grandparent visitation. This is about to get very ugly. Already ugly, Helen, but we're ready." I drove home, made lunch I barely ate, and waited for evening, for Claire, for the next phase, because Brianna had made a critical mistake. She'd thought fear would break me. Instead, it had forged me into something harder. The hearing was scheduled for December 15th, formal eviction proceedings in Santa Clara County Superior Court. My lawyer versus their lawyer, a judge determining whether my 30-day notice was legally sufficient. I wore my Navy suit again. Claire sat beside me in the courtroom, taking personal time from her job 6 hours away to be there. Donald sat at the plaintiff's table with 3 binders of documentation. Michael and Brianna sat across the aisle with a lawyer they'd clearly found quickly, young, nervous, shuffling papers with uncertain hands. They'd filed a response claiming I was retaliating against them for family disagreements and that the eviction was harassment. The judge, a woman in her late 50s with steel gray hair and sharp eyes, reviewed the filings with the expression of someone who'd seen every variation of family drama. "Ms. Peterson," she addressed me directly, "this is your son we're discussing." "Yes, Your Honor." "And you want to evict him?" I want to establish a fair rental agreement or have them vacate my property, yes. Why now, after 5 years? This was it. The moment where I could be portrayed as the vindictive mother or the wronged property owner. I chose my words carefully. Your Honor, the arrangement was always meant to be temporary assistance. Over the past year, I've been systematically excluded from family life, deliberately not invited to gatherings, denied access to my grandchildren, while continuing to provide free housing. When I attempted to address this by establishing a formal lease at fair market rent, I was told explicitly that if I proceeded, I would never see my grandchildren again. That's a lie! Briella stood up, her voice shrill. Her lawyer tried to pull her back down. The judge's gaze swiveled. Mrs. Hayes, you'll have your opportunity to speak. Sit down. Briella sat, face flushed with rage. Continue, Ms. Peterson. Your Honor, I have documented evidence of the exclusion, the threats, and... I paused, then decided to go for it. Evidence that they were attempting to sell my property without my knowledge or consent. What? The judge's attention sharpened. Explain. Donald stood. Your Honor, if I may. At her nod, he pulled photographs from his binder. These were taken on October 18th of this year. They show a real estate sign visible in an interior window of the property. When my client inquired with the agency listed, they confirmed they'd been contacted by someone identifying themselves as the homeowner interested in a market assessment. That was just research, Michael blurted. We were just looking into the home's value, not actually selling. You told the agent you were the homeowner? The judge interrupted. Silence. Michael looked at Briella. Briella looked at her lawyer. Their lawyer looked sick. Your Honor, the young lawyer tried. My clients may have misspoken to the agent, but there was never any intent to actually defraud. But there was intent to deceive. The judge flipped through her papers. And the threats regarding the grandchildren? Do you have documentation of those, Ms. Peterson? Donald handed up more papers. Testimony from the plaintiff's daughter, who was told by Mrs. Hayes directly that access to the grandchildren would be denied if the rent requirement proceeded. Additionally, a recording of a conversation in which Mrs. Hayes made explicit threats in a public location. The judge listened to 2 minutes of audio. Briella's voice, cold and clear, saying, "Without access to our family, what do you have? You're just a lonely old woman waiting to die." The courtroom was silent when it finished. Even Michael looked pale. Mrs. Hayes, did you make these statements? Briella's composure was cracking. She's taking them out of context. She was being unreasonable, trying to throw us out with nowhere to go, and I was just threatening grandparent alienation as leverage in a property dispute, the judge finished. Mr. Hayes, do you have anything to add? Michael stood slowly. He looked at me, really looked at me. For the first time since the hearing began, I saw shame there. Finally. But also something else. Resignation. Your Honor, my wife and I, we made mistakes. But my mother's house, the house I grew up in, we've made it our home. Our children have grown up there. To force us out right before Christmas. You had 5 years to establish your own home, Mr. Hayes. 5 rent-free years. Most people would call that generous beyond reason. The judge looked at her notes. I'm approving the eviction. You have 60 days to vacate the property. Additionally, I'm awarding Ms. Peterson court costs and referring the matter of potential real estate fraud to the district attorney's office for review. Your Honor, please. Briella was on her feet again. Sit down. The judge's voice could have frozen lava. Mrs. Hayes, you threatened to weaponize children against their grandmother because she wanted fair rent for her own property. You attempted to represent yourself as the owner of property you don't own. and you're now playing the victim. I suggest you spend the next 60 days finding a new place to live and reflecting on the difference between generosity and entitlement." She slammed her gavel. "We're adjourned." I sat frozen as people filed out. Claire squeezed my hand. "You did it, Mom!" "I destroyed my relationship with my son." "No, Brianna did that. You just refuse to be a doormat anymore." Across the courtroom, Michael was staring at me. Not angry, just broken. Brianna was hissing something at him, but he wasn't listening. He walked over slowly, stopped a few feet away. "Mom..." "Michael." My voice was steady, but my heart was breaking. "I didn't know about the real estate agent. That was all Brianna. I swear I didn't know she'd called them." "But you knew about the exclusion, the dinners, the systematic erasure. You knew, and you let it happen." He had no answer for that. 60 days, I said quietly. Use them wisely. Find a home. Be a father. Figure out who you want to be, because the man standing in front of me isn't the son I raised. I walked out of the courthouse with Claire's arm through mine, Donald following with his binders, and I felt not triumphant, not vindicated, just tired and sad and relieved that it was almost over. Behind me, I heard Brianna's voice, sharp with rage. "This is your fault, Michael. Your pathetic mother and your weakness." And then Michael's voice, quiet but clear. "No, Brianna, this is our fault, and I'm done pretending otherwise." I didn't look back. They moved out on February 10th, 2 weeks before the court deadline. I knew because Claire drove by and texted me a photo. A U-Haul truck in the driveway, boxes stacked on the lawn, Brianna directing movers with a face like thunder. I wasn't there. I'd made that decision deliberately. This wasn't about gloating or witnessing their humiliation. It was about reclaiming my property and my dignity. I could do that without watching my son load his family's belongings into a truck. The keys arrived by registered mail 2 days later, along with a brief note in Michael's handwriting. "House is clean. Utilities transferred. Good luck, Mom." No apology. No acknowledgement of the years of manipulation. Just good luck. As if we'd been business partners concluding a transaction rather than family bleeding from wounds that might never fully heal. I waited a week before visiting the house. Claire came with me, and we stood on the sidewalk for a moment, looking at the place that had held so many memories. My wedding photo albums were created in that living room. Michael took his first steps in that hallway. Richard had died in the bedroom upstairs, and for 5 years it had been occupied by people who'd used it as a weapon against me. "Ready?" Claire asked. I unlocked the door. The house was clean as promised, but it was also stripped. They'd taken everything, including things that were mine. The antique mirror from the hallway, the bookshelf Richard had built, even photographs from walls, leaving nail holes and faded rectangles where frames had hung for decades. "Mom!" Claire's voice was tight with anger. "They stole from you." "I'll make a list for the lawyer." I kept my voice steady, walking through rooms that felt both familiar and alien. The kitchen they'd remodeled with my saved rent money was beautiful and sterile. The designer appliances were gone. They'd taken those, too, apparently considering them their property. In Emma's former bedroom, I found something that made my eyes burn. A drawing left on the floor. Stick figures labeled Grandma, Emma, and Jacob, holding hands under a sunshine. A child's artwork, abandoned in the move. I picked it up carefully, folded it, put it in my purse. "We should catalog everything," Claire said. "Every item they took, every damage, every..." No. I surprised myself with the word. "No, I'm done. The house is mine again. That's what matters. Everything else, let it go." "But Mom, they stole," and I'll note it for the record, but I won't spend the next year fighting over furniture and appliances. I won't give them more power over my life. I looked at my daughter. I'm 62 years old. How much time do I want to spend angry versus how much time do I want to spend living? Claire hugged me fierce and tight. Dad would be proud of you. I don't know about that, but he'd understand. Over the next month, I transformed the house back into something that felt like mine. New paint, warm colors, not institutional gray, new furniture that held no memories of Michael and Briella. I turned Emma's room into a guest room and Jacob's into a craft studio. The master bedroom I couldn't face yet, so I left it empty. The real victory came in mid-March. Donald called with news that was almost anticlimactic after everything else. Helen, the district attorney's office, has concluded their investigation into the real estate fraud matter. My heart hammered. And? They're offering Briella a plea deal. Misdemeanor fraud, community service, fine, probation. No jail time, but it'll be on her record. Michael wasn't charged. They determined he genuinely didn't know about the agent contact. Will she take it? Her lawyer advised her to. The alternative is risking a felony trial, and with the recorded evidence of her threats and manipulation, she'd likely lose. Briella Hayes with a criminal record. Briella Hayes with a legal admission of fraud on her permanent record. It felt like justice, though not the kind that brought any satisfaction. There's more, Donald continued. Michael's filed for divorce. I sat down. What? Filed 2 weeks ago, citing irreconcilable differences. He's requesting joint custody, but not alimony. He wants it clean and fast. Does Claire know? I believe she does. He apparently called her last week. After we hung up, I sat in my newly reclaimed living room and felt the full weight of victory. It wasn't triumphant, it wasn't sweet, it was just heavy. Michael was divorcing Briella. My grandchildren would be children of divorce. The family structure I'd known was demolished, but I was free. My house was mine. My dignity was intact, my financial security was restored, and most importantly, I'd stood up for myself when every instinct said to fold. The phone rang, Michael's name on the screen. I answered, "Hello, Michael." "Mom." His voice was rough, like he'd been crying. "Can we talk? Really talk? I need to explain and apologize, and I know I don't deserve it, but I need to try." I looked around my living room, at the space I'd reclaimed, at the life I was rebuilding. "Yes," I said finally, "we can talk, but Michael, on my terms, in my time, when I'm ready." "Of course, anything. I'll wait as long as it takes." After we hung up, I sat in the quiet house and felt something I hadn't felt in months. Hope. Small, cautious, but real. The war was over, I'd won. Now came the harder part, deciding what kind of peace I wanted to build. 6 months later, I stood in my garden on Maple Street. My garden again, planting tomatoes in the warm May sunshine. The house behind me hummed with life. Not my life alone anymore, but life I'd chosen, life I'd invited in. Claire had moved back. Not permanently. She kept her apartment 6 hours north. But she'd negotiated remote work 2 weeks per month, and those weeks she spent with me. In her old bedroom, now repainted a soft sage green she'd chosen herself. "Mom, the real estate agent's here," she called from the back door. I wiped my hands on my gardening jeans and headed inside. The agent, a competent woman named Lisa, smiled when she saw me. Helen, the couple loved the cottage. They're making an offer this afternoon. My cottage, the small, sad place I'd retreated to, was being sold. I didn't need it anymore. I was home. That's wonderful news. After Lisa left, Claire brought me iced tea, and we sat on the back patio Richard had built 25 years ago. "Have you decided what you'll do with the cottage money?" Some to the grandchildren's education funds, some to charity, and some, I smiled, for that trip to Italy we've been talking about. "Really?" Claire's face lit up. "Mom, you're serious." "Completely." September, before the tourist season ends. 2 weeks. Florence, Rome, the Amalfi Coast. I've already been researching. My daughter hugged me tight. Dad would love this. You traveling again, living again. I thought about Richard often these days, not with the crushing grief of early widowhood, but with fondness, with gratitude for the years we'd had. He'd taught me to be strong. I'd just forgotten for a while. The doorbell rang. Claire went to answer it, and I heard Emma's voice, "Grandma," before I saw her. My granddaughter appeared in the doorway, taller than 6 months ago, grinning, gap-toothed. "Hey, sweetie!" I opened my arms and she ran into them. Michael followed more slowly, Jacob's hand in his. My grandson had grown too, more confident, chattier. "Grandma, Daddy says you have a new garden. Can I help plant?" "Absolutely. Let's get you some gloves." This had become our routine. Every other Saturday, Michael brought the children for the afternoon. We'd started slowly, brief visits, carefully supervised by Claire. But over months, trust had begun rebuilding. Not the blind trust of before, something more cautious, more honest. Michael hung back while the children scattered to explore the house. He looked better than he had in the courthouse, thinner, tired still, but with something clearer in his eyes. Purpose, maybe, or just honesty. "How are you holding up?" I asked, the question we always started with now. "Better. The apartment's small, but it's ours. Mine and the kids, I mean. We're managing." The divorce had finalized in April. Briella had fought for full custody and lost. The judge had reviewed the case history, the threats, the manipulation, the fraud conviction, and awarded joint custody with specific provisions protecting the grandchildren's relationship with me. Michael had rights. I had rights. Briella had supervised visitation until she completed anger management and family therapy. And work? Good. I got promoted, actually. Regional manager. Better pay, better hours. Enough to cover rent and childcare. He paused. "I'm making it, Mom. Without her, without free housing, without shortcuts. I'm actually making it. I'm proud of you." His eyes got wet. "I don't deserve that." "You're earning it, day by day." I touched his shoulder. "That's what matters." We didn't talk about Briella much. I knew from Claire that she'd moved 2 hours away, taking a job with a company that apparently didn't run thorough background checks. Her social media had gone silent. Her friends had dropped away when the truth came out. Turns out people didn't like befriending someone convicted of fraud who'd threatened to weaponize children. I felt no triumph in that, just sad recognition that actions have consequences, and Briella was living hers. "Mom," Michael said quietly, "I need to say something. I've said I'm sorry 100 times, but I don't think I've said this. You were right about all of it. The entitlement, the manipulation, the way I let her isolate you. I was weak, and I chose wrong, and I damaged something that might never be fully fixed." "It's not fully fixed," I agreed, "but it's healing." "And Michael? Acknowledging weakness is actually strength. You're becoming the man I always hoped you'd be. Later than I'd wanted, but not too late." We stood together on the patio watching Emma show Jacob the tomato plants, their laughter drifting across the yard. This house that had been a battlefield was becoming a home again. Not the same home it had been. That was gone forever. But something new. Something earned. That evening after they left, Claire and I made dinner together in the kitchen Briella had remodeled. I'd had it redone again. Different cabinets, different counters, no trace of her expensive taste funded by my generosity. "You're really happy, aren't you?" Claire observed, chopping vegetables. I considered the question. Happy? Maybe. Content. Peaceful. Strong. "I'm free," I said finally. "For the first time in years, I'm free to be myself without apologizing for it. Free to set boundaries. Free to demand respect. Free to say no." "And that's enough?" I smiled. That's everything. Outside, the sun set over my garden, my house, my reclaimed life. Somewhere across town in a small apartment, my son was reading bedtime stories to his children. Somewhere farther away, my former daughter-in-law was living with consequences she'd earned. And here, in the home I'd fought for, I was whole. Not because I'd destroyed anyone, not because I'd sought revenge, but because I'd refused to be erased. So that's my story. A family dinner I wasn't invited to. A house I reclaimed. A spine I rediscovered at 62. Would you have done the same? Fought back when it would have been easier to stay quiet? Demanded respect when silence would have kept the peace? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever had to choose between being kind and being respected? Between family harmony and self-worth? If this story resonated with you, I have others. Stories of women who refused to disappear, who fought for themselves when no one else would. Subscribe if you want to hear them. And thank you for listening to mine. Thank you for witnessing that sometimes standing up for yourself isn't selfish. Sometimes it's survival.